So she didn't inherit Grandpa's jawline, but there's no doubt she's family. It's your job to raise her, and it can be tough. Let's make it easier. With technology and automation, you can do more, like produce high-quality bales with way less effort. Built-in sensors can measure bale moisture and size, so you can monitor quality on the go and manage your fleet from your phone. Sit back and enjoy effortless operation. Discover an easier way to work.
Welcome to another edition of Cattle Chatter. Cattle Chatter, of course, is being powered by John Deere, so turn your hay or silage into consistent, dense bales with John Deere round balers. Precision features, integrated technology, and dependable performance you can count on. Well, we unfortunately could not meet up in person. We're in the same building, the same football game, as you can see from our loyalty, but unfortunately, the Skol chant isn't going to work for the cattle market today.
No. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I couldn't, we didn't, the other 70,000 people there that we didn't get a chance to, but I'll tell you what, for your listeners, Susan is undefeated. The Vikings have never lost when she's been to a game in person. So I think let's let's pass the hat and we'll get her another ticket, especially for that Philadelphia game coming up, right?
I would love that. That's my birthday weekend. So I'm thinking I should be there.
I think so too. I think that ticket's cheaper than the Packers ticket. That's the highest priced one from my experience when you're shopping.
Yeah.
So anyway,
very much so. So I just mentioned his name, Brad Kooima. He joins us from Kooima and Varilek out of Sioux Center, Iowa. Let's talk about the volatility that we're seeing right now in this cattle market. You've been telling us it's going to be working its way here, and here it is.
Yeah, for sure. It's been. Thanks for having me on first of all, and. Unless you've been on Mars, this week has been very, very volatile. Friday, neutral-ish cattle on feed report. Over the weekend, the news that you had a screwworm case within 70 miles of the United States. By the way, on a load, 100 head cattle that weighed 600 pounds that got shipped from nearly the Panama-Mexico border all the way down there, where that's known to have the screwworm infestation. They haul a load of cattle up there, and then they hear one of them's got an open wound, and they find it. So it's not like those flies are 70 miles away. I'm just saying this because I've heard this story mistakenly quoted about 1 million times. But a positive case nonetheless. Secretary of Ag Rollins, in her comments about how we're going to, keep the cow herd safe and blah blah blah. And I'm not going to mind. I'm getting a bit cynical about this whole thing, Susan. This isn't 1966. I got a feeling that we've got a lot better handle on how to handle these types of problems. There's a product called Ivermectin that is cleared and works I keep waiting for us to develop some protocol through treatment that would assure you that these cattle don't have it. But whatever. I'm not the boss on that matter. But it was her extra comment, Susan, after that said, we're thinking that we might have to incentivize the rancher to expand his cow herd. Well, I'm not quoting her exactly, but that's close. Well, that whole deal morphed into this idea that, holy balls, they're going to pay us to retain heifers. And that was the big rally there then on Monday, where the back months or the feeder cattle back months anyway went up $9.25 because they thought, well, it's going to be less cattle available to feed that feeder cattle supply. Live cattle higher too, because it's going to be less cattle. Instead of going into a feedlot situation, some of those heifers are going to become made into cows. But they walked it back, and they walked it back officially today. And Secretary Rollins is in Kansas City for an Ag Summit deal, and said that no, they have no plans now to make any payments of any kind to save a heifer, which I don't know how you'd administer that program anyway. It sounded like an absurdly stupid idea from the first second of it, in my opinion, and I'm glad to hear that they've cooler heads have prevailed and they're not going to do that. So that's the volatility, part of that volatility factor. Without that injection of bullishness on Monday, I think the market would have been softer anyway, Susan. And so as we're kind of getting that in place now, cash did not feel great going home Friday. 37 on Thursday, 36 on Friday for us. Discounted now again to the south solidly. Typical characteristic of bull markets is that the north leads the south, not the other way around. and it felt like it was going to be softer this week to us in the north, and it hasn't disappointed. It is a little softer, unfortunately.
So you look at that softer cash, but we've had this conversation over the years going September into October. Normally we start to get that. So is
Yeah,
this just are we good at getting back to our normal pattern a little bit maybe for the cattle?
yeah. I hate it when we're right, right? I mean, we talked about beef breaking in September, and it certainly has. We talked about the seasonality of typically when we get at these long fed northern calves, sometimes we have a few extra ones around and maybe even a little bit of weight. And I guess I'll make a comment on that to get to your question. You know, for this year, you and I have talked about one thing about leverage in the north, right? Because we were super current, super pulled forward. I made the comment many times that we're selling next month's cattle now. And in January we were selling the February cattle. February we were selling what was intended to go in March. And when you're in that kind of a scenario, you've got a ton of leverage, because if you don't like the bids this week, you can go, well, these cattle ain't fed anyway. We'll see what happens next week.
Right.
Now I feel like you're hearing some of these stories of, gosh, I could have got 245 3 weeks ago, and now I'm only getting bid 232. And these feeder cattle are awful high to buy. It's like, I'll just feed what I got, and feed's cheap. And then on top of that, the weather is perfect, so cattle performance has been really, really good. So yeah, now are we way backed up? No, but it's not that hyper current situation that we had a couple of months ago. So we'll work through it. And I just think we're going to be bogged down here for a while, maybe all the way going into Thanksgiving. But I wish that we could get a little perking up here on this beef story at the end of the month, because right now it's pretty weak. I'm anxious to see if there's any news next week when President Trump goes to visit Brazil. There could be news there, Susan. I'm just kind of reading the tea leaves there and guessing, of course. But if they want to lower the price of beef, specifically hamburger, backing off of this tariff deal with Brazil would be a potential solution to that.
So then let me ask you this on the spinoff of Brazil, and let's head to Argentina, because they had put that holiday tax in place, which we knew for the grains, and we reached that within 3 days. But as I was reading this morning, they didn't take that tax incentive off for beef and for poultry.
Right. I've read that too. Interesting. I guess. Yeah, I remember when we got mad cow disease in Canada, and they turned it into a North American problem. You remember that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm wondering whether or not, as this whole screwworm thing and the whole politics that are involved with it evolve into it's a whole Western Hemisphere type of a thing. I think that there's a crowd that understands that there's a way to somebody's profiting from this, obviously, and it's not the Texas cattle feeders, that's for sure. So I think there's a little more to the politics of this than strictly worried about a parasite.
Yeah, and as we see this move forward, I think of CattleCon and our cattle meetings for our state meetings coming up. We're going to have some interesting spins to it too, as we watch what this has had, not just to the Texas cattle feeder, but the trickle down effect it's had to others.
There's no doubt. I'm anxious to go to for that reason, and now for a couple of other ones. I'm kind of curious whether anybody's going to talk about LRP. I waved that flag for a year and a half. How that subsidy harvesting was wrong, and they finally did figure that out. So, and I'm anxious to see what the take is. I can tell you from the people that I know, from Texas, who I might not go fishing with, but at least I know, right? They are livid. They want that border open. Don't kid yourself. This being 80% full, there's no way to run a feed yard. I can tell you that. So I would think there'd be quite a bit of pressure to bear. If I had to guess it, when is that? First week of February? I would bet that the border's open by then. I think cold weather will open the border myself, but again, I'm just guessing.
So, and we talked about this in the past, the movement that we've seen of cattle. Is that something that's going to continue to pull those cattle down into Texas and Oklahoma just because that border's closed?
Yeah, I think it's almost going to have to, because there's nothing they can do to change fat cattle supply there for the next quarter and a half almost down there. So I think you're going to continue to export cattle from Kansas to Texas, from Nebraska to Kansas, et cetera, et cetera. So freight constraints will probably continue to keep that discount for the north, even though our quality of our cattle will be much better. I would afraid that we're going to be the weakest link for a little while here in the north, just because they're going to have to, make that freight calculation of what it costs to get them to a Garden City, Kansas, or get them to a plant in Texas.
So does that, but looking to fill feed yards, does that put some pressure on the prices at the sale barn and keep those numbers up higher? Or am I looking at this from a wrong direction?
No, I don't think you are.
Okay.
Market psychology. I was hopping off and on here watching a sale, and getting a little business done actually just before we got on the podcast here. I have people say to me, "Well, there's not enough feeder cattle, Brad. They're never going to break." When anybody says they're never going to do something, it's time for you to get out your whatever blocking shield. Feeder cattle are high. Break evens are way above futures on most of these feeder cattle. I tell you what, you take the cash market down a little bit further, you start to get into the yearling type cattle that break even someplace. Some of these cattle that these people have bought, they break even above 250. Well, if the market's like it is today, and you're looking at that kind of a deal, I don't care if there's a shortage of feeder cattle. People will sit on their hands in the bleachers and they'll say, "Well, they got to buy them cheaper." So I think it's a little bit of a false idea that just because there's a tight supply. I think feeder cattle prices are driven mostly by what you just sold your last fat cattle for. So, if you just got done making a whole bunch of money, you're going to be a little more aggressive.
Okay.
Not as smart. I'm trying to figure out a polite way here of, and I'm in that boat. I get it. You got an empty pen. I understand, but feeder cattle are high relative to where the fats are. They're high.
Well, I never thought I would say on a Cattle Chatter episode that you're not bullish, at least a smidge in this trade, but not right now.
Yeah, I know everybody likes it more when I like me more too when I'm bullish. So it's like, but I just think we got a pause here. I really think the first quarter of the year looks to be pretty good yet. I think there's going to be a little bit of retention of heifers, whether you get paid to do it or not. The rancher's never made this much money. You don't think he's already economically incentivized to consider it? I think he is. So that means that there's a few less heifer yearlings available. That makes a little less supply. So unless we get something real weird from a demand black swan type thing, we get a little correction here. And of course, little corrections, 10% corrections of a market that's at 240, it's $24, right?
Yeah.
So it's all relative. It's no place for the faint of heart right now. Wear your seatbelt.
All right. I always appreciate your conversation. Best way for folks to have more with you.
KKB Trading is our website.com, but call us 712-722-0023.
And that, folks, another edition of Cattle Chatter being brought to you by John Deere, where their data-driven farming means better decisions. This is Cattle Chatter.
The views and opinions of this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers. There is substantial risk of loss in trading futures and options, which you should carefully consider prior to trading.